26 aircraft. That was the number Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported on March 15th. 26 PLA aircraft in a single 24-hour window, jets crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait, entering Taiwan's air defense identification zone, doing what they have been doing in different numbers almost every day for years. And here is what most people get wrong about that number. 26 sounds like background noise. It sounds like a press release nobody needs to read. It sounds like the kind of thing you scroll past. The return of these Chinese military aircraft has drawn renewed attention to the ongoing tensions across the strait as Beijing continues to assert its claims over the self-governing island through regular displays of air power. But background noise is the strategy. That's not an accident. That's not routine training. That is a method, deliberate, patient, and very well understood by everyone in Beijing and Taipei, even if it barely registers anywhere else. And embedded inside that method is something that should alarm you far more than a daily aircraft count: a blockade. Not an invasion, not missiles, not soldiers on beaches, a blockade. And today we're going to show you exactly how it works, why it works, and what it would mean for every person on Earth if it ever did. The gray zone. What repetition is actually for? Let's start with the concept that makes this story so hard to cover and so easy to miss. Gray zone warfare. It's not war, it's not peace. It's the deliberate exploitation of the space in between, actions carefully calibrated to stay below the threshold that would trigger a military response, but aggressive enough to change facts on the ground, or in this case, in the air and at sea. In 2025, the PLA conducted a record-breaking level of air and maritime activity around Taiwan, sustaining the higher operational tempo that began following William Lai's inauguration as Taiwan's president in May 2024. PLA aircraft conducted 3,164 air incursions into Taiwan's de facto air defense identification zone, an increase of 22.4% from 2024, when the PLA had already smashed previous records. 3,164 incursions in a single year. That is more than 10 per day, every single day, without exception. From May 2024 to December 2025, average monthly PLA air incursions reached 319, a 129% increase from the monthly average from January 2022 to April 2024. But here's the piece that makes this more than a statistics story. In late February 2026, something unusual happened. The flights stopped. For nearly 3 weeks, PLA activity around Taiwan dropped to almost nothing. The PLA Air Force almost completely ceased activity near Taiwan since February 27th, after conducting near-daily sorties into Taiwan's air defense identification zone since 2023. And then, on March 15th, they came back. The return to activity ranked only 8th highest in 2026 alone, meaning what some outlets called large-scale was, by Taiwan standards, a relatively modest resumption. Think about what that tells you about the new normal. A number that would have been alarming 3 years ago is now just 8th highest in a single year. The baseline has moved. The abnormal has been normalized. That is not an accident. That is the entire point. Justice Mission 2025, the blockade rehearsal. Now let's zoom out to the exercise that analysts are still studying, because it is the clearest window yet into what Beijing is actually preparing for. On December 29th and 30th, 2025, the PLA conducted a massive exercise it called Justice Mission 2025. As announced by the PLA's Eastern Theater Command, the drills would focus on sea and air combat readiness patrols, seizing comprehensive superiority, blockading key ports and territory, and three-dimensional external line deterrence in the maritime region around Taiwan, blockading key ports and territory. In their own words, the exercise continued an encirclement and blockade theme that first emerged clearly in the 2023-2024 Joint Sword exercises. This wasn't a one-off. This was the continuation of a pattern, a theme that has appeared with increasing clarity and specificity across multiple major exercise cycles. And the scale was staggering. The first day saw 130 sorties by PLA aircraft directed toward Taiwan. Of these, 90 crossed the Taiwan Strait centerline. A total of 14 PLA Navy ships conducted operations in the vicinity of Taiwan, alongside 14 China Coast Guard ships. On the second day, 17 rockets impacted in an exercise zone north of Taiwan near the port of Keelung, and 10 rockets impacted in an exercise zone southwest of Taiwan near the port of Kaohsiung, making them, to date, the closest PLA projectiles to land near Taiwan's coast. Rockets landing near Taiwan's major ports, in a drill, in December 2025. And nobody invaded. Nobody crossed a beach. Nobody fired a shot in anger. It was, officially, formally, a training exercise. That is the genius of the gray zone, and that is the terror of it. The blockade logic, war without invasion. Let me explain the strategic concept that makes a blockade so attractive to Beijing, because once you understand it, you'll never look at a routine aircraft count the same way again. An invasion of Taiwan is hard. The Taiwan Strait is 70 to 220 nautical miles wide. Taiwan's mountainous terrain and densely populated western coast are largely unsuitable for amphibious landings. A direct assault would require enormous resources, suffer enormous losses, and trigger an immediate international response. A blockade is different. A blockade says you don't have to fire a single shot at the island to bring it to its knees. Taiwan imports roughly 98% of its energy, its entire high-tech economy, including the semiconductor fabrication plants that produce the chips that run the world's electronics, depends on uninterrupted shipping. Close the ports, threaten the shipping lanes, spike the insurance costs, and within weeks the economic pressure becomes catastrophic. The United States called on China to exercise restraint and avoid actions that raise tensions following the Justice Mission 2025 war games, simulating a blockade of Taiwan, calling China's military activities a source of unnecessary strain. Notice the careful language. Unnecessary strain, not act of aggression, not preparation for war. Because legally, economically, diplomatically, a blockade occupies a gray zone too. It can be framed as a quarantine, as law enforcement, as protecting Chinese maritime sovereignty. And while the lawyers argue about terminology, the global supply chain is already convulsing. This isn't just about Taiwan. The reach is expanding. The muscle memory is being built. I want to take a breath here, not because the stakes are lower, but because I think this is the moment where this story becomes personal. Taiwan produces roughly 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. The chips in your phone, the chips in your car, the chips in hospital equipment, in military systems, in the servers that run the internet. All of it flows through an island of 23 million people that is currently being systematically encircled, drill by drill, sortie by sortie, exercise by exercise. Like if that reframed it for you. Comment, did you know about Justice Mission 2025? Share with someone who should know. Subscribe. Hormuz, Ukraine, nuclear treaties. These are one strategic moment. Taiwan's deterrence math, making invasion too painful. Taiwan's defense minister has been unusually direct. We need to make it feel like any plan to attack Taiwan would carry a high degree of risk. In other words, to make its assessment of a successful invasion very low. If our defense capabilities continue to improve and our deterrence grows stronger, then its calculation regarding an attack on Taiwan will decrease. That would have the effect of pushing back such a date again and again. That is deterrence math in plain language. Make yourself too painful to attack, and the attack doesn't happen. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te has proposed a sweeping special defense budget, roughly $40 billion directed toward new missile defenses, long-range precision weapons, and unmanned systems over the coming 8 years. Taiwan is advancing its layered air defense architecture under the T-Dome concept, a multi-layer defense system covering low, medium, and high altitudes. A key element is a sensor-to-shooter network combining domestic platforms with U.S.-supplied Patriot missiles and radars. But here is the problem. And it's a significant one. Taiwan's commitments are colliding with domestic political reality. The opposition parties that control the legislature have repeatedly voted to block Lai's proposed special defense budget. Since December the 2nd, the two opposition parties, which favor closer ties with China, have blocked the bill at least 8 times. A legislator from Lai's party put it plainly, the longer Taipei delays, the more likely Beijing is to misjudge Taiwan's political resolve. Deterrence depends on readiness. Taiwan is trying to build an unbreakable shield while its own politicians argue about whether to fund it. The second-order risk, when other wars drain the arsenal. Here is the strategic variable that almost never appears in Taiwan coverage, and it should. Deterrence is not just about what Taiwan has, it's about what the United States has. The conflict in Ukraine consumed enormous quantities of American ammunition, artillery, and air defense interceptors. The escalation in the Middle East is doing the same. Patriot interceptors, ATACMS missiles, naval assets. These are not infinite resources, and they are not being replenished as fast as they are being expended. The PRC deployed several long-range vessels, including the aircraft carrier Liaoning and 4 Type 055 destroyers in December 2025, in response to Japanese concerns about a Taiwan contingency. Meanwhile, China is building. Satellite imagery revealed 2 large openings in the hull of China's Type 004 aircraft carrier, under construction at Dalian Shipyard, positioned similarly to nuclear reactor containment units on U.S. nuclear carriers, suggesting the Type 004 will be nuclear-powered. A nuclear-powered carrier gives China the ability to operate in the Pacific far longer and far further than its current fleet. China is also experimenting with cognitive warfare. A long-endurance PLA Winglung 2 drone made at least 23 flights over the South China Sea while transmitting false transponder signals, at various times impersonating a British fighter jet, a North Korean passenger jet, and a sanctioned Belarusian cargo plane. Fake signals, false identities, drones that pretend to be something they're not, creating noise, burning adversary resources, confusing the picture. This is not future technology. This is happening right now. The 3 scenarios. Where does this go? 3 scenarios. The honest version, not the comfortable one. Best case. Gray zone pressure continues but stays in its lane. Crisis management channels, including a potential Trump-Xi summit this spring, reduce the risk of accident or miscalculation. Some analysts suggest China may be on best behavior ahead of the meeting, or signaling to Taiwan during its domestic defense budget debate. Taiwan's deterrence budget eventually passes in some reduced form. The KMT released an $11 billion special defense budget proposal, less than a third of Lai's proposal, but a signal that some version will likely pass. U.S. arms deliveries continue. The semiconductor supply chain remains intact. The blockade stays a rehearsal. This is achievable, but it requires the gray zone to stay gray. No accidents, no miscalculations, no domestic political crises on any side. Worst case. A confrontation at sea or in the air, a collision, a warning shot, a maneuver misread by an exhausted radar operator becomes the spark. Beijing escalates to a declared quarantine of Taiwan's ports, not an invasion, a blockade with legal-ish language wrapped around it. Insurance rates for Taiwan Strait shipping go vertical. Companies reroute. Semiconductor production slows. The global economy, already stressed by crises in the Middle East and Europe, absorbs a tech supply shock on top of an energy shock. Washington faces a decision under compressed timelines: break the blockade militarily in fighting a nuclear-armed power, or accept a fait accompli ending Taiwan's effective sovereignty without a single amphibious landing. U.S. policy ambiguity becomes the most dangerous word in geopolitics. Most likely. Continued coercion with periodic spikes, large drills, flight surges, diplomatic signaling. The lull and resume pattern becomes permanent rhythm. Pressure, pause, pressure, pause. Each cycle pushing the baseline higher, normalizing slightly more, eroding the median line slightly further. Taiwan funds a reduced deterrence package. The U.S. delivers some arms, delays others. Regional capitals lack systematic crisis planning for a U.S.-China conflict over Taiwan, meaning escalation would produce regional chaos and emergency evacuations at scale. The blockade stays in rehearsal until one day it doesn't. What to watch? Signals that matter. Here is your watch list for the coming weeks and months. Watch the Taiwan Defense Budget vote. 3 competing versions from Lai's DPP, the KMT, and the Taiwan People's Party are moving through the legislature. Whatever emerges signals to Beijing whether Taiwan's political will matches its rhetoric. Watch the Trump-Xi summit. Taiwan is almost certainly on the agenda, even if not in the communique. What both sides say, and more importantly agree not to say, will set the tone for PLA activity through the summer. Watch PLA exercise announcements. In 2025, China conducted 2 large-scale named exercises around Taiwan. If a third named exercise appears in 2026, especially one explicitly rehearsing port blockade scenarios, that is a meaningful escalation signal. Watch the U.S. munitions pipeline. Congressional debates over defense spending and arms transfer timelines to Taiwan matter enormously when American stockpiles are simultaneously under pressure from multiple theaters. If deliveries slow, deterrence erodes. Watch the drone program. PRC cognitive warfare using drones with false transponder signals is a new capability being actively tested. If this scales up, Taiwan's radar picture and everyone else's becomes significantly more contested and ambiguous. 26 aircraft That's where we started, a number that sounds like background noise, a number most people scroll past, but now you know what's inside that number. The rehearsals for blockade, the rockets landing near the ports, the drones transmitting false identities, the defense budget blocked 8 times by legislators who favor closer ties with the country doing the encircling. Taiwan's defense minister put it as plainly as anyone can. If our defense capabilities continue to improve and our deterrence grows stronger, then Beijing's calculation regarding an attack will decrease. That would have the effect of pushing back such a date again and again. Again and again. The goal is not to win a war. The goal is to keep making the war not worth starting. But deterrence is a negotiation between what you can do and what your adversary believes you can do. And right now, with American stockpiles stretched across multiple simultaneous crises, with Taiwan's defense budget caught in domestic politics, with PLA capabilities expanding every quarter, that negotiation is under pressure in ways it hasn't been in a generation. The gray zone is not peaceful. It is a slow-motion pressure campaign measured in sorties and ship days and rocket impacts near ports. It is a rehearsal for something, conducted openly, daily, in full view of the world. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Like this if it changed how you read the Taiwan headlines. Leave a comment. Do you think Taiwan's deterrence math works? Or has the window for it already started closing? See you in the next one.